especially I was on fire. So I just want to talk about Jesus with everyone. So but it really was. It was one like I get to interact with folks who don't know who Jesus is and what he's done for them. And that is absolutely rad.
Welcome to the Enduring Church Podcast, hosted by Nathan Castleberry and Michael Davis, helping pastors grow their churches while equipping the body to love their neighbors. Yeah, their literal neighbors.
Nathan, we are back. How's it going, man?
It's going great. Shout out to all of our tent makers tuning in.
That's right. Well, as you can imagine, and as you're seeing by the title, we are going to be talking about bivocational pastors today.
I've got a lot of admiration for anyone out there who is listening and is in a bivocational, or I just realized lately, co-vocational.
Yeah.
So we're going to dive into that a little bit, and just want to express a lot of admiration and appreciation for ministry leaders in that season of life.
Yeah. One of the cool things about working in church planting with the North American Mission Board is that, I learned something that I did not know before I was there, is the fact that the vast majority of churches in the SBC are under like 50 people. And so the bivocational thing is not it's not a thing that you can do. It's mandatory for a lot of folks, especially as they're getting their church off the ground. So I'm going to echo your sentiment that I am humbled whenever I meet a bivocational pastor, because he is not doing this for anything other than trying to just make Jesus known in his community. Right. So It's like, it's super encouraging. They're not doing this for money. They're not doing this for fame. They're just doing this because God has given them people and they just want to love them well. And they're willing to literally do whatever it takes to do those things.
Thank you for checking out the Enduring Church Podcast on YouTube. If you could do us a favor, hit the subscribe button and the bell icon to make sure that you're aware whenever a new episode drops. Also, if you got some time, give us a thumbs up and also leave a comment. Really helps us with the algorithm. Well, now back to the show.
Yep, and as you were sharing with me kind of in our pre-roll, we do have some people tuning in from different parts of the world where Christianity isn't exactly celebrated, maybe even illegal. So in communities like that, we know that pastors are unable to devote all of their time to their house churches and their underground churches. And so just want to take a minute to recognize and just honor all the different contexts and all the different types of pastors that might be listening in. And just want to let you know, we see you. More importantly, though, God sees you.
Yeah, and we're not going to mention specific countries because we don't want to highlight anything, but just know that it's one of the coolest parts about what we're doing here is the fact that we get to see that we are getting traffic from places where being a Christian is illegal and can land you in prison. So just know that we value you and we value what you're doing for the kingdom, and we're humbled that you tune in.
Yeah. So let's do it.
Let's do it. So let's get to the first question of this episode. What would you say? First of all, it would be cool to hear about your background a little bit and about your experiences with your, I guess not co-vocational, but side hustle vocational, experience. But what would you say are the biggest advantages and challenges of bivocational ministry for pastors today?
Yeah. Yep. So as long as I can remember, my primary source of income has been ministry. So I've been very blessed. But it started out, I was a traveling worship leader. And so that was a lot of my income actually through college and whatnot, as just those honorariums and kind of doing that. But, during that time, I also worked at Little Caesars. So I know that grind of doing something that you're not passionate about. Like, not once at Little Caesars was I like, oh man, I was put on this earth to, create this pizza. And, at Little Caesars, you literally take a paintbrush, dip it in butter, and paint the butter onto the crazy bread. So Never thought that would be a skill set. I developed that. I'd be a bread painter.
I did that. I did that. By the way, it was Gumby's, but I worked. It was just this. But I was a pizza cook as well, so I did not know that we had that in common. That's awesome.
Pizza cook is a generous term for what I was doing at Little Caesars, because I actually started as the sign guy on the
Oh,
road.
oh no.
I got promoted to pizza cook, but I started at the bottom. And
Yeah.
you know, especially in the early 2000s when like $5 pizzas were happening, like, man, that was like a big deal. But you would be surprised how angry people got at me for just spreading the good news of $5 pizza. It felt like oppression, persecution. I'm just out here trying to. So, anyways, and then later in life, you know, I helped run a production company, doing a lot of video work and
Yeah.
whatnot. It just kind of fell into my lap. Honestly, it was like a way to take a skill set that I developed in the church world, running creative teams, running film teams, and I had a friend who had a marketing firm that happened to have a lot of faith-based clients, and he goes, "Dude, you speak the language of pastor and producer. Can you help?" So,
Yeah.
you know, it's nice to supplement income because a lot of pastors who are fortunate enough to be full-time ministry are probably not getting paid what they're worth. And that's one thing
Yeah.
that I've always appreciated. I'm going to pander a little bit here to our pastoral audience, if you don't mind. If you've ever watched Dave Ramsey talk about do his Financial Peace University talks, when he gets to the part about tithing and funding the ministry and the purpose of tithes and offerings, he nails it. You know, he says that most people that are in full-time ministry could take their leadership tool belt and go into the secular world and probably exponentially increase their income. And
Yeah.
so he just really, really encourages churches to be as generous as they can, so that they can bring their pastors on full time and allow them to, you know, dedicate their schedule, their priority, their attention to the church. And so I think that's probably, to circle back to the question, I think that's just the biggest challenge that I hear a lot of my bivocational friends express is just there's only so much time in the day, and so
Yeah.
you've got a job that's paying the bills that you may or may not be passionate about, and then you've got this calling that you do feel a lot of energy and invigoration around, and just trying to figure out how to spend more time in the things that energize you is a real mental grind. And so I think that that's something that we just want to just acknowledge here at the Enduring Church podcast. If you're in that space, that's got to be tough. And God knows the season that you're in. And I'm just kind of thinking a little bit about Galatians 6:9. Don't grow weary of doing good. For the
Yeah.
proper time, if you don't give up, you will see a harvest.
Yeah, it's I mean, I'll be honest with you, like having a full-time job and then having kids and my wife, and I don't know how they do it. I'm pretty much wrecked at the end of the day anyways. So again, it's one of those things where I mean, like again, Paul being the tent maker, it wasn't, we do all things as unto the Lord, right? So like we were joking around about being pizza cooks. There are people who do that with excellence and are doing it as if they're working for God. So that's cool, but it's like I do see I personally, and maybe you can tell me that I'm wrong here. I don't know how you can divide your focus between that many different things and then still serve your flock without maybe some changes to the way that you do church. And I think that this is maybe where we can maybe unpack some best practices. But I mean, I can't even imagine the level of burnout among bivocational pastors, if they're trying to do it looking like other churches, right? You're bivocational. Yeah. So you might have 10, 15, 20 people who belong to your church. But if you're trying to have like your ecclesiology look like the church that has 500 folks, you are going to kill yourself.
Right. I think there's something beautiful about embracing where you are in the life cycle of your church.
Yeah.
And it may feel more brutal than beautiful. I just want to
Yeah.
acknowledge that. But again, God is in charge of resourcing you for the vision and the calling that he's given you. And if the resources at your current season are not allowing you to bring on staff, or not allowing you to give your full attention to it, then I think that should also then help set expectations about what growth looks like,
Yeah.
what leadership looks like. And the sad thing is, the majority of our conferences, the majority of our books that are written about growth and leadership are in a lot of ways tone deaf to the place that the majority of pastors are in this country. The majority of pastors can't even afford to go to a conference and
Right.
hear about all these cool growth techniques. So again, the goal is not to settle for where you're at, but the goal is to say, I am where I am. There's a season for everything. I am what I am by the grace of God. And should we be preparing for growth? Should we have a leadership pipeline? Should we be developing our laity and our deacons and our span of care for our congregation? Yes, do all those things. But also set realistic expectations for yourself, because I do think a lot of the times that we are having to navigate burnout is because our expectations and our reality are misaligned. And when we just live in that dissonance, it can be really, really upsetting and disorienting.
Yeah, I mean, again, and these aren't expectations our churches have of us. This is expectations that I'm assuming pastors have of themselves. This was something that this it's not a statistic, but kind of an illustration that I thought was very, very surprising. That you could put every single pastor of a quote unquote mega church, so like a church, let's say over 2,000 people, in one basically 747, like the entire
Wow.
country. So if we have an expectation that we're going to be that every church is going to grow to that size, I think you have a greater probability of becoming a professional baseball player than you are to pastor a mega church.
Wow.
So understand that these are absolute realities, but we should also have expectations of our churches in order to be able to pay what I would say is one of the most important jobs in the entire planet, which is which is shepherding the flock, the church of God that you have been entrusted. And I was a part of a church plant a while back, and I remember the meeting where we all realized that we could finally support our pastor without needing outside assistance. And
Wow.
I will tell you, we literally, that was part of the meeting, and the whole place just absolutely erupted. Like, we were able to do that.
That's beautiful.
And it's
That's
like,
powerful.
and it was one of those moments where it's like we've done it. We've got a person who loves us, who will show up at hospitals if we're sick, who will be with us when I remember the same church, and we had only belonged to it for a short time, and we had a miscarriage, and we literally, I think we've been attending there for like 3 weeks, and the pastor was there. Like, Kelly mentioned it to one of her friends who was attending there. The pastor was there within like 15 minutes and was praying with us. And like, this is the gift that so many folks who go to churches don't understand, that this is not a job that is easy. That is not a job that is 9 to 5. This is not a job that is just, you go and you create a sermon every week. You speak for an hour, maybe 2 services, and then you go on. This is a person who's devoted his life to loving and discipling and caring for the person, or for the people that God has put in their life. So it's like, this is not just for pastors of saying, I need to get paid so I can live without like my family suffering. This should be a matter of like urgency for any church that is small and whose pastor is struggling. Now, that said, I think that that sometimes the pastor who has such a love for his church is willing to do the things that are super hard. But I'll be honest with you, I don't think that's an ideal state.
So I think Paul draws attention, in Second Corinthians and other places where he's like, I didn't take any money from you.
Yeah.
And I I'm gonna go out on a little bit of a limb here and say that's a Paul thing, not a God thing.
Yeah. I
I
agree.
don't think I think that was descriptive, not prescriptive. I think, and I know this is not an exact parallel because we're talking Old Testament, New Testament, but I think there's a philosophical thing that we should note when it comes to uh, Old Testament beliefs around tithes and offerings and how the priests, the Levites, were meant to basically live off of what is brought to the temple, brought to the synagogue.
Yeah.
It goes all the way back to like God's like, hey, you owe me your firstborn, so in place, give me the Levites, and
Yeah.
they're not going to have land. They are going to be provided for by the other tribes.
Yeah.
So that they can do the like temple administration, the tabernacle administration, all the things. So I do think part of God's design is that those shepherding figures that God raises up should be able to be provided for by the resources brought to the to the storehouses by the congregation. Um, Now, how all of that gets allocated to personnel, to bills, to ministry, that's another podcast episode. But
Right.
I do believe that God's design is for the pastors in his best case scenario to be able to be fully taken care of and provided for by the bringing of tithes and offerings.
Yeah.
With that being said, I want to caution our pastors
Yeah. That's
about the
true.
way that they talk about money
Yeah.
because your congregation might be smarter than you think, and they might realize that, man, my pastor only talks about money when we're lacking resources. so,
Fair.
so we need to. I had a guy named Jim Shepard. I want to get him on the podcast one day. He is the CEO at this fundraising organization called Generis, and they help churches and Christian schools raise money. And he challenged me, and I do this often at my church. I tell them, don't give to this church to support what we're doing. Don't give to this church like we are another 501c3. Tithes and offerings were never meant to be an expression of generosity.
Yeah.
Tithes and offerings were meant to be an act of financial obedience
Right.
and stewardship, handling your money the way that God has asked you to. And so, like I say, like for me and my family, I'm a literal 10% tithe on gross income. You know, that's not generous for me. That's just obedience for me.
Right.
So one of the things I tell our people is like, just like God is on the hook to provide for this church. So don't give because of this church. Don't give because of the ministries. Give because of God. Give
Yeah.
because of God. My faith is in His provision, not your giving. And so I just think just having that posture gave me such confidence to talk about money because I'm not talking about needing my bills to be paid. I'm not talking about my salary needing to be covered. I'm making it about obedience and God honoring finances.
Right. Right. And here's the truth. I mean, we there are certain pastors who are going to places that are just poor or have very few Christians or have it's just again it's difficult. Bivocational pastoring sometimes isn't it's not one of those things where this is an option, like you have no choice. So hear me out when I say that you might be in a position where there's just no possibility of it. And when I say that it's that again, I'm not being critical of people who do it. I mean, God bless you for doing it. I mean,
Right.
I'm in awe of you, but just understand that I don't believe that it's ideal. I do think that there are benefits, and I'd love to talk to you about that. But just
Yeah.
but understand that I'm not being critical of anyone who God is called to do this. Now, I will say, and this would be kind of cool to talk about after we talk about the benefits. It's I wonder how many people are bivocational, not because their church has to have them be bivocational, but because some of them believe that poverty should be a mark of a pastor.
Woo! Ouch. I will challenge that line of thinking all day. But
Yeah.
but We do need to get into um, being dual vocational by choice.
Yep.
I do think there is something to unpack there. But you want to talk about the benefits?
Yeah, let's talk about some of the benefits, because there are some benefits, right? You're not just beholden to certain folks and certain expectations, and so yeah, let's talk about the benefits.
So I think of two really, really significant benefits to the bivocational pastor. A bivocational pastor has a lot more, um, has has a lot more, hopefully, a lot more self awareness.
Yeah,
And when you're doing calls to action about volunteering, when you're doing calls to action about participating in a small group or going on a mission trip or doing a big community outreach thing, you're more mindful of the calculations that your congregation members have to make about how they split their time up.
right,
Uh, we I'm full time at my church, and I've got people in some cases putting in more hours than me on a Sunday morning. Like the worship team, they get there before I do.
right,
And a lot
right.
of them have full-time jobs too.
That's
So
right.
I for those of us who are not bivocational, we can sometimes be a little bit tone deaf and have our heads in the sand of 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 the fact that people are doing their job, getting their kids to dance class, getting their kids to music class. They're doing they're getting themselves to all the other things that are on their calendar, and they're trying to show up for church and all the extracurricular things. So I think a bivocational pastor has a lot more awareness of those time challenges that come
Right,
just with being adult and and having multiple commitments. The other thing that I think is an advantage to a bivocational pastor is you are around unchurched people a lot more than someone like me. I have to intentionally get myself out of the office and be around unchurched people. But when you're in the marketplace, when you're in the workplace, when you're in the break room,
right.
you're around people who don't know Jesus. So you're getting to be reminded constantly of what the real bullseye is. And it's the Great Commission. It's making disciples. And so there's a part of me that is a little bit jealous of that, of being able to just constantly be around the people who your heart should be breaking over.
Yeah. So okay, and I think that's completely fair. It's one of those things where I think that for those of us who are not pastors, we should actually see that as the blessing that it is, because a lot of us don't. I remember because I was a Christian for about 15 minutes before I went into ministry, but I do remember that period of time between coming to faith and then going into full time ministry. That especially I was on fire, so I just want to talk about Jesus with everyone. So but it really was one, like, I get to interact with folks who don't know who Jesus is and what he's done for them, and that is absolutely rad. So let's get into the hard question, because interestingly enough, I actually went on a church like job board just out of curiosity once, and I was shocked as to the number of churches looking for pastors who had the expectations that the pastor was going to make very little and have literally no choice but to be bivocational. It was actually in the actual job description. So how do you, like, again, how do you feel about that, and about the fact that they even have a search committee but that literally would put on there, it's like, we have an expectation that you're going to work, or even worse, we have an expectation that you're not going to work, but we're going to pay you like just pennies.
Yeah, yeah. So I I want to try to assume the best,
Right, right,
knowing that the vast majority of churches in our context here in America are actually small, and
right,
probably in their current financials. I would love to think that it's more of a situation where they can't pay a competitive salary
right,
instead of won't. Now, I'm sure there are some that won't. I'm sure
r-
there are.
right,
But I think if you're walking a situation where, they want to, and they're hoping that getting the right pastor in there could help their church begin to grow, and all these things could happen. I would love to believe that is that might be part of the dynamic
Right.
behind some of those job postings. I know in many cases it's not. I know in many cases people think that it's unacceptable for pastors to be paid well.
Yeah.
And you know, I I would love for those people to say that to my kids.
Yeah.
You know,
Yep.
I would love for those people to say that to my wife, that they should that our ability to put money away for college, or our ability to put money away to take a week off and recharge,
Yeah.
should right, like it's one thing if you can't, it's another thing if you won't. And if they won't, if that's something that they're just unwilling to do, then I would say, man, like, stay away from that. Unless
No.
you have a very clear sense of calling toward that, that just seems like dangerous territory. Paul talks about, like, the he uses the word like double honor, like they like,
Right.
like they should be like, you should be honored. And I think some people take that as a financial implication there. So, but again, we're not here to really weigh in on that. But I think that's a really, really tricky conversation to have. Jesus says the workman is worth his hire.
Right. 100%.
So yeah, but then he also doesn't clarify then what is what should the wages look like for a minister.
I think I've actually figured this one out. I think that, listen, we hear stories of pastors. Actually, I heard one just a little while ago where the pastor had like 2 homes. And this wasn't like a mega church. This was just, maybe an older church with a lot of money. But like, this was one of those things where, the church paid for his house and all this. Again, this is not that is an outlier. I believe so. You shouldn't become rich compared to your flock. I also don't think you should be in poverty compared to the flock that you're leading. I think that there's a very simple equation to this. Are you right in the median income of your community? And I
Like,
don't.
can you afford to live in the community where you're
Can you
ministering?
afford to live? And again, if the people in your church would never go to a job where there's no expectation of, like, I don't know, vacation time or sick pay or whatever else like this, the problem is that I think so few people, and maybe this is one of the reasons why I really like this show, because I'm learning new things about what it means to like what pastors are going through all the time. I think that a lot of folks don't understand just the sheer amount of work that's involved in it, the sheer amount of work that's involved for your wife, because that's another thing that a lot of folks don't realize, is that the wife is oftentimes an unpaid person that is doing a substantial amount of work. They're getting, honestly, oftentimes they're getting 2 for 1. So I think a lot of folks, it's like, well, this is easy to just, again, there's a misunderstanding about the things that the pastor is doing, and the things that his wife is doing, and the things that his children are having to endure, that they don't realize the worth of this, of the person that they are supposedly supporting.
Right. No, I love the idea of like a general rule of thumb being somewhat like, what is that median salary range in the community where you're ministering? Now, I know like we said earlier in the podcast, we have people listening literally all over the world. So this
Right.
this is not a one size fits all. And that's where I think we have to recognize that while Jesus said the workman is worth his hire, he also is like, the Son of Man doesn't really have a place to lay his head. He was a traveling
Right.
itinerant preacher. Now, Jesus also had some ladies like Mary Magdalene that were like bankrolling the ministry as well.
Yep.
So again, there's so many layers, there's so many nuances to this. And I think so much of it has to do with calling and contextualizing that calling. And if you are in a part of the world where it really is like just like the majority of your congregants might be living in poverty. So
Yeah.
this a lot of this conversation might feel totally irrelevant to you.
Yep.
But one thing that is transferable though is still teaching people about like financial stewardship, and the widow's mite is something that Jesus celebrated.
Right.
So encouraging people with whatever resources they have in your congregation, whether it's a little or a lot, having that act of bringing their tithes and offerings to fund the ministry, to make ministry possible. Not saying that that could ever get you to a place where you are, I've got no delusion that may or may not be enough
Right.
for a pastor in the developing world to live full time off of that, right? But still, encourage your congregation, not for the sake of your salary, but for the sake of their financial discipleship,
Yep.
to
And
give
obedience. Yep.
generously, right?
Yep. I wonder how much of this is that can be solved if we kind of like maybe temper our belief in just going at it alone. It's one of the things like when I said that our pastor, we celebrated when we were able to support our pastor on our own. He had support from churches and from sending organizations and things like that. Like I wonder if maybe sometimes again, and I'm not saying some pastors legitimately want to be bivocational. There are benefits to it. I know some of them. I've got one of my best friends is a bivocational pastor, would never want to do this full time. And actually they have a plurality of bivocational pastors that are all, and they're going from house to house, and it's cool. But I think some of them they've got a belief that like they need to do it alone. And I think that partnering with churches, again, if we have a belief and an understanding of the church universal, this could actually potentially solve some of these problems.
So I've got a really close friend who he is self-funded. The closest thing you could call him is a missionary, even though he's not a missionary. He still lives here in the States, but he is all over the world in the
Yeah.
1040 window and just about every continent. And what his team does is a big part of his ministry is raising money to go into the developing world and to fund house churches.
Right.
And in different, the American dollar can go really far in other countries, and so they will see an entire church be funded by five figures,
Yep.
right? So to me, a big part of this conversation is not just about at the individual uh, local church level. A bigger part of this conversation is seeing us as all a part of the same team. And it would be a beautiful thing if more churches that are financially stable could look at some of our brothers and sisters that are in the underground church and in the house church movement and say, hey, we want to, no strings attached. Not
Right.
that this doesn't. We don't need this because it looks good on our mission reporting. We don't need this because da 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 da. Like, no, we just want to make sure that more pastors are able to give some of their flocks a greater level of focus and attention. I mean, what if our love offerings were were focused on that? I think that
Yeah.
could be a really beautiful kingdom-minded approach.
Having my experience with the North American Mission Board, one of the things I thought was really cool in the way that they do, and it's called the Send Network, which is their church planting efforts within the North American Mission Board. Again, we all know there's denominational problems with every denomination, there's politics, whatever, but I think this is an element that's actually really, really solid, is that they are understanding that it's not just about sending, it's also about supporting. So they actually have two classifications. And by the way, this was a while ago, so that the strategy might have changed. I doubt it, but they have this idea of like send cities. It's always, you have to be careful. Where there's the most unchurched cities in the country, and what they do is that they bring along churches on these catch the vision tours, where the pastors, the church planners within those contexts, almost like a Shark Tank situation, where they do prayer walks with these. Again, these are all pastors of very large churches, well-resourced churches, and they go around and they go and visit with these pastors, really get to know them, get their heart behind what they're doing, and then they become one of two things. They become either a sending church or a supporting church, right? So it's like they're saying, we're going to send people to you to help you, and sometimes send church planters as well. But the lion's share of the focus is supporting churches. Like, we're going to support you with prayer, we're going to support you with volunteers, we're going to support you with finances. And I think that that again, for the pastors who are doing bivocational for lack of options, I wonder if it's just possible that they have this mindset of like independence that is unnecessary and frankly potentially unbiblical. Because there are churches who want to help.
Right, right. There are churches who want to help. There are networks out there.
Yeah.
There are funds. I mean, God owns the cattle on 1,000 hills. The resources are there, and
Right.
so if you are in a situation where you're forced to be bivocational, you don't want to be bivocational, and I think what I'm about to maybe suggest, I'd like to believe it could work just about anywhere, but if you feel uncomfortable with like denominational politics, I know that's a thing.
Yep.
Um, Networks of churches are something that I see happening more and more now, and developing a shared resources model, right? And it's a lot less expensive for a handful of churches to use Planning Center or Mailchimp or whatever,
Right. Right.
and so sharing some governance or sharing some resources or like there's a really amazing network that is doing this domestically and globally called Water's Edge.
Yep.
They're based out of Michigan. I've been able to do a lot of work. I've been with them in Indonesia and all over. And the way that they support a lot of their international churches is really, really cool. So you don't have to go at it alone. And if you look at some of the places where Paul is talking about finances, specifically in 2 Corinthians, it's about supporting the churches in another community, or it's about
Stole
bringing
that from me, bro. Come on.
oops, oops, or
No, you're
bringing
right.
money back to
Yeah,
Jerusalem, which was kind of
exactly.
sending people out. So again, I think in a lot of ways, we get so passionate about that one community that we're called to. We get so passionate about that zip code. We get so passionate about our body that we sometimes might miss out on some resources that were there if we'd be willing to play ball and
Yeah.
and join in with some other like-minded ministries and churches to take a kingdom approach. I mean, what's the psalm? Ask and I'll give the nations to you.
Yeah.
I do believe God's heart is to do more than we could ask or imagine.
Yeah. And I wonder how many churches are not doing what you were saying that should be done by the individual, right? It's this idea that, the tithing is this is just an obedience thing, right? Tithes and offerings are obedience. But like, I wonder how many churches are so internally focused in regards to their desire to be able to make sure that they're financially okay, that they're not contributing to missions and to church planting and to supporting the work of kingdom growth in the same way
Yeah.
that a lot of folks are.
I encourage ministry leaders out there, whether you're in a time of scarcity with your church budget or abundance,
Yeah.
to try to do with your church budget what you're asking people to do with their personal finances.
Amen.
Generosity is not a dollar amount as much as it is a mindset, and it's only generous if it feels like a sacrifice. So be generous with your church funds and trust that God's going to cover the gaps. And I think that that's an area where God makes it pretty clear where we can test him. And Malachi wasn't written to just one individual person. So
Right.
I think God will prove himself faithful if we are literally putting our money where our mouth is.
So this is awesome that this entire episode is trying to convince pastors to love on bivocational. It's like, take care of these people. They are doing the work. It's awesome. Just help them out. No, I mean, I think it's the same thing you can say regarding church planting, right? I think so many churches are so internally focused that there's not like, and the statistics is pretty amazing. Like everyone talks about, like, if we give away our resources, if we give away some of our best people for planting a new church, it's going to negatively impact us. But I have never actually seen that happen. I've never seen a church that is radically devoted to supporting missions and radically committed to planting churches that it has had a negative impact on them. Like literally none. I've never seen someone send out a church planting team where God hasn't brought in twice as many people of means or twice as many people who are active within the church. It is, again, you can see it time and time and time again, but it's the scarcity mindset or sometimes even, let's just be honest, competitive mindset that has made a lot of us just not, again, this is from the individual all the way up through the church.
Jesus says in the Sermon on the Mount that at the individual level, we should not be worried about what we're going to eat, what we're going to wear, where we're going to live.
Yep.
because the Gentiles worry about these things. And when he's saying Gentiles, he's not making so much of an ethnic remark there. He's saying the people who don't know me
Yeah.
worry about provision.
Right.
You who know me should not worry about provision.
Right.
Like we should not have the same anxiety triggers that an atheist has.
Right. No, for sure. For sure.
And I think if we are asking that of our congregations with their personal finances, then we should have the exact same mentality when it comes to our corporate finances and our church resources. I'm not going to worry about the things that the world worries about because
Right.
I know the provider. So
Yep.
instead, I will seek first the kingdom and all these things will be added unto me.
Yep. And again, for those of you who have bivocational, I'm talking to you, Chris, because I know you listen to this. Like, if you do this because this is the way that you guys do church, you're a rural church, you like going all over the place, and bivocational is just the way that you like to do church, awesome. But if you are struggling, if you are having an issue of like having to decide whether or not you can love your flock or do your job, or even worse, not, like, love your family, understand that this isn't something you have to do alone. We constantly talk about how pastors who are in isolation are going to burn out, or they're going to have moral failures, or they're going to have a variety of other things. Just understand that there is a community of pastors who want to see you succeed. There are a community of believers who want to see you succeed. And just know that, again, I don't believe that, again, don't just because Paul was a tent maker doesn't mean that this is the ideal state. Like for Paul, this is what Paul did, right? He was planting churches. He wasn't, and then he was moving on. So understand that you can't conflate the two things, but understand that if you are struggling, if you are just at the end of your wits and you're having to work a job you hate, seek help. I promise you, there are pastors and networks out there. There are dozens of networks out there. Some of them don't even require you to have denominational, affiliation. Some of them are like what you're doing with local church, right? There's a variety of different churches that are coming together and saying, we're going to partner. Sojourn Network does the same thing. Find people who are like-minded, who believe in what you're doing, who believe in you, preferably before you plant your church. Let's just be honest, people who can see the mark of a pastor in you, and then go out and do it with the support of a church who believes in you and believe in it, and see the call of God in what you're doing and where you're at.
Yeah. And I think before we wrap up, if we have a minute, I think it'd be great to just give a little bit of a nod to the ministry leaders, the pastors out there who are choosing to have a bivocational approach. I think my understanding is that's where they shift the language. And I know this feels like wordsmithing, but it makes sense from bivocational to co-vocational.
Yeah, exactly.
The implication there is bivocational is out of necessity.
Right.
Co-vocational is more by design. And we are seeing in church planting circles that a lot of pastors are choosing co-vocational. They sense that more can happen as it relates to pastoral care and church leadership by hiring multiple part-time pastors, multiple part-time ministry leaders, rather than just having one full-time person. And honestly, I can see some significant wisdom in that, given the rate that more pastors are leaving the ministry than joining the ministry these days in America. Sure. And so I can see some actually humility instead of hubris in that posture, where it's like, I think the church would benefit from several of us giving 50% instead of one of us trying and failing to give 100%.
Yep.
And so we do see, Carey Nieuwhof has a lot of statistics and Barna around one of the significant growth barriers from the 100 to 200 person congregation is a full-time pastor trying to do everything.
Yeah. Amen.
And so I think maybe a response to that, kind of a reflexive response at first, but maybe more of an intentional response now, is this co-vocational model where it's like, you know what, I'm not going to burn out doing this. I'm not going to sacrifice my mental health and my family at the altar of pastoring. I'm going to intentionally kind of have a governor on my engine by remaining part-time and sharing the load with some other ministry leaders. And I just want to say, if that's you, um, I think there's something really, really cool about that.
Yep, and let's just be honest with the gig economy today. It hasn't. I mean, it's easier than ever. Um, and I remember it was a side hustle, but I mean, it was a very lucrative side hustle where I was doing voiceover work. I know that I stammer a lot, and it's probably surprising, but people pay for this silky voice.
Was that
And
Muppet Babies in the 90s?
no, it was
Were you Baby
actually
Fozzie?
no. It's funny. It was mostly either explainer video or people paying me to talk like this, bub. But it
Yeah,
was
that wasn't very Muppety.
no, it was not. It was Space Marines and Barbarians. There's a couple of video games with my voice on it.
Oh my
But
gosh.
so that being said, it is possible. But we're going back to what we were talking about before. The makeup of your church and how you allocate responsibilities can't be the same as the standard independent church. I mean, it just can't. So
Yeah.
if you just like with Chris, they're not trying to make it fit into a box, right? They're all kind of like it's like this house church model, which again, that makes sense where the church is supporting to the best of their abilities. They're doing great work. The pastor isn't expecting to make a living off of this, but this is the thing. This is the difference maker. You're right. Bivocational is for lack of options. Co-vocational is for just this is the way that we think. We are voluntarily becoming that tent maker, not because we have to, but because this allows us to be able to grow in a way that gives us the best, multiple people doing multiple different things, rather than me being dirt poor, working at Little Caesars and still trying to do all the different things that I'm supposed to be doing. But I
Yeah.
think that
And
yeah, and the gig
the
economy makes it super easy. You could be a writer, you could be a voice actor, you could do a graphic designer, photography. Just things have gotten very easy for people. Most people have
Uber.
Uber, and then you can invite people to your church. Who knows? You could you can actually that's your church growth model is become an Uber driver.
Honestly, if I was planting a church in a walkable urban type area, that'd probably be the only reason that I would have a car is
Yeah.
to be an Uber driver, get to know people, evangelize, invite to church. And so again, there so many times I think we stumble across this idea in our podcast discussions as there are guiding principles that are applicable to every church in every expression of church,
Right.
but there are nuances and best practices that are not a one size fits all. And I think the homework that we all have to do is like, what's going to best serve our community, what's going to best serve my congregation, and in light of our financial landscape, what is reality.
Yep.
What can we believe God for and for growth and increase? But what's going to be the best stewardship? And one of the resources that I don't think pastors always steward well is the resource of your own personal health.
Yep. Amen.
And that's where I applaud some of our co-vocational people, because I just think there's this level of like, I can't do it all.
Right.
And so when we embrace the fact that we are not a member of the Trinity, that we are just a pastor, we can't be in multiple places at one time.
Right.
There should be some freedom to kind of say, okay, you know what? It's not all on me. I'll play
Right.
my part faithfully, but ultimately, this is on God.
Yep. And we're going to go back to that saying, right? Mission dictates. So just understand that there's no one's judging you, pastor. No one's judging you for what you're having to do. If you're leading faithfully and you're trying to do the will of God, you've got nothing but our respect, like legitimately.
Yeah,
so,
man.
Nathan, dude, this was a great conversation. Thank you so much for joining me, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm kind of craving some crazy bread right now. I'll just talk about Little Caesars.
Dude, I am a fan of pizza, but it's always just there. But you enjoy your crazy bread. Listen, thank you all for listening to us, and we'll catch you guys in a couple weeks.
See you soon.
This has been the Enduring Church Podcast with Nathan Castleberry and Michael Davis. We'll see you next time.